My name is Lucie Lederhendler. I'm the artistic director of the Art Gallery of Southwestern Manitoba. And this is my friend and colleague, Kevin Conlin, whose show, not Sedimentary Antiquity, that was 2015. Ancestral Aviators is what we're all here to learn about today. So a few notes, we're not live streaming, but we are recording. We're going to clip everything together and post it on YouTube. If anybody really can't be on video, just let us know afterwards. We'll snap a quick private photo of you and make sure you get edited out. That does mean that for questions, it's best for posterity if you wait patiently for me to hand my little fuzzy thing to you. And we have, Shalom behind the camera. If you really can't be on camera, then let him know and he'll avoid you. So this show is, I don't know how many years in the making, but we kind of claimed this spot, 5 years you've been thinking about it. Why don't you walk us through your connection with clay and fossils? Can we start there? Introduce yourself, talk about your fossils.
Sure. Introduce myself. For all of you that don't know, I'm Kevin. Most of you probably know that anyways. I'm a ceramist by education and trade basically. I've always had an interest in clay, but I've always had an interest in fossils too as well. Both of them basically right from childhood. My mom would give me a box of clay for Christmas, which was always a strange thing to get for Christmas, but as a kid, it kept me occupied through the whole Christmas break, right? Fossils, my love for fossils came about in grade 3 when I moved to Brandon. I was at Earl Oxford School and we took a trip to the Manitoba Museum where I spent my lunch money on a trilobite because at that time the gift shops and that sold fossils and little fossils and trinkets.
Yeah, you can't buy them at gift shops anymore.
You can't buy them at gift shops anymore, but I spent my whole lunch money on buying these trilobites. But it was worth it because even today I still have them in the collection that I have at home with stuff. So, and at that time the clay and the fossils didn't really come together. It was over years of they didn't really come together until I went into university and started working with clay, but also collecting fossils. And then I started to realize that all these fossils and stuff are usually harbored in clay or muds of some sort. Fossils come from sedimentary rock, and basically sedimentary rock is basically clay or shale or slate muds. So the two started to come together, partly because it's interesting finding these things in the clays and in the shales, but also it's interesting finding them in a material that used to basically be from a different landscape, from a different time. And basically my work kind of evolves around, when the title is Ancestral Aviators, it kind of evolves around life moving through time on the planet, and basically nothing is here for very long, or doesn't stay very long. Cretaceous and the Mesozoic period, the time of, most people are familiar with the dinosaurs and the plesiosaurs and the ammonites. I mean, that trudged along for well over 140 million years. We've trudged along for about 70,000 years, where we started to paint inside caves and do art inside it. And as time went on, we got together and lived in communities, and then we built towns, we built cities. But if you were to take a 500-page dictionary, we're just a paragraph on the back page of one of those pages right now, if that makes sense as far as time is concerned. And we're probably the only species that has evolved in this world naturally, but has changed it. So now we're kind of the controller of the world, the controller of the environment, which is concerning.
Yeah.
But it's, as a species, we are different, and how we're treating this planet is different. So usually we try to fix things when something goes wrong, and then something else goes wrong. And one of these days, Mother Nature is going to say no more. So in other words, my work is kind of about the past, the present, and basically what's in tune for us in the future, right?
There's like something of the, what we call the memento mori, like the reminder that we'll all die in that kind of base concept. And I want to highlight the title of these 4 murals, which is Mortality Plate.
Yeah.
It's not the tragedy that the name of this discovery would suggest, but you've incorporated elements from what we call the Anthropocene, which is that geological layer that will forever remember humanity's existence on the Earth. Some say it starts with the first nuclear tests because there's radioactive material over an entire geological layer, and some say it starts with just the refuse, the castics, the garbage.
Well, I mean, mortality plates you can find anywhere if you're lucky in the fossil record where there's been an extinction event. In the Cretaceous shales in Manitoba, between the Asheville and the Favel, I'll throw these words out, people won't understand them, but they're formations. And in the Asheville, there's evidence that the sea was very rough at the end of the Asheville, because you can see it turned upside down in what is now the shale and everything. And there is one layer that's, doesn't matter where you go in the province, if you get to the same level, you'll come across the disturbance in the bottom of the sea that was there at one time. Now it's shale and it has been pushed up, but you'll also see all kinds of fossil material. There's plesiosaurs, there's fish, there's shark teeth. It's randomly everywhere. Nothing's really articulated, meaning that it died and just settled out on the bottom and became a fossil. Articulation is when something's still in the same position as it was when it was alive. Disarticulation means that it's all over the place. And the stuff at that layer, at that boundary layer between the Asheville and the Favel doesn't matter where you go, everything's disarticulated. So something was going on the planet at that time, but it seems like it caused a lot of problems and a lot of death. But as you go through the fossil layers, even older, you do find these layers where things have happened on the planet.
Yeah, so what you're saying is that it's not the record of the way that something died, but the collection of all of these dead things in one single plate.
Yeah, like a mortality plate is when there's kind of all of a sudden everything dies, right? Or, for instance, also up north, there's areas where you get a collection of small bones, bird bones, sometimes plesiosaur, shark's teeth, fish vertebrae, and it's like being at the beach. You know, when you're standing at the beach up to your knees or your ankles in the water, and you look and you see the ripples in the bottom of the sand, but then you see all kinds of little dead minnows and stuff in the ripples. Well, you also get that in the fossil record. But as you go up north, there's some areas that are quite vast in mass with 2 or 3 inches of fossilized bird bones and everything else. Again, it's a sign that something was going on. Also, there was a northern continent, which we don't have anymore because the glaciers probably removed most of it when the glaciers slid down. But during the time of the dinosaurs, there was basically, North America was kind of like 3 continents. There was the western continent, which is BC, Alberta, some of Saskatchewan, and then most of Manitoba was basically all seaway. But when you got up to the north, there was another continent that is suspected to have been there, because also the evidence shows river basins and that flowed into the sea and deposited all kinds of material. But some of these places, again, are just scattered with inches, 4, 5, 6 inches, 10 inches of death, right? Most of the stuff is small, but with the bird bones and the small dinosaur bones that come out, it's being washed into the sea from land somewhere. And again, it's all around the same time as this kind of disturbance that was going on. Right?
I want to make sure that we talk about technique when before we move on from murals in general. I think that there's similar things that are happening because you have so many students here listening. You were mentored by somebody who's well known for really pushing the boundaries of what ceramics can do. That is to say, why would you choose ceramic if your goal is a mural? And so for you, you're using tiles, you're doing your best to make those tiles invisible without being precious about it.
Yeah.
So talk about technique. What's the real like?
All the murals you see here are basically tiles. Okay. I think the one behind Joan is probably the best tile piece as far as construction goes, because if you stand and look forward at this one, there is a few places where you can see kind of a seam line, and what these tiles do is I overlap the top material on top so it hides the seam line. Now that's done with putting a thin piece of paper between them before you start overlapping them, right? So they all come apart afterwards.
And you have to make sure that you treat them the same for the entire process.
Usually something like this, if I constructed it, it would sit under plastic for 6 months and dry under plastic. Okay?
Joined, right, in place.
In place, basically, yeah. Now and then I'd remove the plastic and push them together because clay shrinks as it does dry. But the whole thing about drying it slowly is those overlaps that go on top of the other tile. If you don't dry them slowly, what they do is they lift up a little bit or move a little bit if you're drying them too fast, because they're the outer edges of the tile. And when clay shrinks, it pulls. So when you look at these and you see an evident seam line, it's probably because the things got dried too fast, and they did. I started working on all this stuff, I think,
a little too late.
probably about April. And then I got sick for about 6 weeks, where I'd go home and look at it and go, no, and go into the house and go to bed.
And they were shrinking.
And I think it was the hardest show I've ever put together, and I put together bigger shows. But I can remember laying on my bed. The show was opening on Thursday, and I think it was Friday night, and I still had a kiln load to fire. And the kiln takes a couple days to fire, and I hadn't loaded it yet. And I can remember sitting there going, well, I was lying there. And finally I said, I got to get up and do this. And so I did, and fired it off on the weekend.
And let's be clear, the kiln is the size of a garage, so it's basically moving an overpacked garage.
You can't park
in and out.
You can't park your car.
Well, you shouldn't.
No, I have a big gas kiln at home. It'll fit six of us standing up inside. Yeah. So I can do quite a bit at once. All the tile pieces were done at one time. In it, and then I think some of the pots too were done with the tiles, the fossil pots, and then the rest of them were done in another firing. So, yeah.
Do we have any questions about technique at this point?
Did you find any maybe impressions of plant life in the Triassic or the Jurassic?
Well, we don't have any exposed Jurassic or Triassic here. What we have exposed is Cretaceous. There's a spot in northern Manitoba where they think it's Triassic, where there's a meteor impact crater, and at one time, to my understanding, there was a small quarry in there. I've never been there, but I've seen slabs from there. But the red slabs that came from there were interesting because they had raindrop impressions in them. So it basically probably came from the edge of a seaway or the edge of a landmass where the water was, and possibly the tide was out. It's hard to say. But yeah, you can usually tell the raindrops because they're quite distinct in the soft mud when they were created, hey?
Yes, I'm interested in plants, and we could have some plant art in the future, looking forward.
Well, we do have imagined plants that we'll look at when we get to the bird
Oh,
bases.
yeah.
Yeah, because we do have a pretty solid record of what plants would have been. Much more succulents,
Well,
right?
yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I've collected all over North America, and I mean, Nova Scotia's and New Brunswick is fabulous for old plant material. 290, 360 million years old, because even the trees, the big trees are fluted like Roman columns and everything else, hey? So it's interesting to see how things change over time, right?
When we talk about things like the Cretaceous is what's available here, what we're talking about is what's revealed, right? It's not that there isn't earlier stuff, it's just it's too deep down
Yeah,
to
I
be
mean,
accessible. It's what's been dragged away.
yeah, I mean, if you think about it, here we are, or here I am, I find marine stuff basically where we are. And the marine stuff used to be the ocean floor. And, you know, people say, how does it get there? Well, we all know about continental drift and continental plates. What happens is the one plate slides under one and the other one slides up on top. And basically that's what's been happening to us here, except it's been happening to us here and all the way to BC, where you got your Rocky Mountains, you got your Alberta foothills. And at one time, the Alberta foothills was shoreline. That's where they find a lot of dinosaurs and that, but back during that time, it was shoreline. So with the continental drift, one continent going underneath the other one, it's lifting it up, and right now we're getting lifted up because where I find a lot of this stuff is at 1,000 to 1,100 feet above sea level.
Yeah. So it's just a matter of what's on the surface, not what's there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you know, the interesting thing about us and everything we do, there's a couple of different types of fossils. You got your fossil bones, you got your fossil invertebrates, your fossil vertebrates, but you also have tracer fossils. Okay, tracer fossils are evidence of something that was there, but they've left a trace. Example is a coprolite, which is a poo, right? Other one is footprints. Those are tracer fossils. The funny thing about us and all our junk, a couple million years from now, there's probably going to be tracer fossils of us, which may even consist of automobiles. You'll see that car pushed into that river and the mud all around it. Well, when that metal possibly will be replaced by minerals if it's in the right environment, right? So
Why don't we head over here to look at these
Okay.
murals and talk about that? So we have mortality plates,
Yep.
And this is kind of our Anthropocene.
yeah, this side of the room is basically our Anthropocene, which is the time period they have dubbed for the human race, which is just a little line on the time scale right now. And basically, from what I see in the fossil record and everything else, I kind of see the same thing in this time period, right? Sooner or later, this material is going to fossilize. It's going to be there. We may never see it. Maybe no one will ever see it. But there's going to be the evidence of it, right? Thus, aviators, right? Going forward and moving through time, right? This particular one is, if you haven't figured it out yet, is plastic water bottles, right? I think I called this one hydrators.
Yeah.
Yeah, just called it Anthropocene hydrators, right? Because whoever finds it, if we don't find it, if they can put 1 and 1 or 1 and 2 together and figure out their water bottles, right? But it's like everything else. They may find this stuff, but they may not know what it was used for or what it did, right? If you recall, anybody that's old and looked at dinosaur books when they were old, dinosaurs were slow, stupid, and couldn't move very fast. Now with technology and science and everything, well, yeah, they can move. They figured they could move 50, 60 miles an hour if they wanted to, the big theropods, in a quick dash, right? So these things with science change over time, right? So, but yeah, the Anthropocene, we've got water bottles here, we've got cell phones there, and we've got tin cans down there, because basically they're a lot of junk that we produce right now. I remember as a kid when I saw the first bottled water a friend was drinking, I thought it was the stupidest, funniest thing that someone would buy a bottle of water. Because at that time, we could go swim in the swamps, we could swim in the river, you could drink the water in the swamp, and it was fine. And it's sad today. We used to go out towards Curran Park, and there was a lot of swamps out there, and we used to play in them as kids, ride our bikes out there and play in them as kids. We would catch snakes, turtles, frogs. They were abundant. And you never got any green algae on that slough or that pond until mid-August, right? Now I go places and there's algae on ponds by the middle of June, right? And that's due to all the farmers and all the fertilizer they put on the fields. It's not the same anymore. I have a creek that runs behind my house, and as a child, you couldn't sleep at night because the roar of the frogs in the slough down there, the Oxbow Lake, was so loud, even in the house you could hear it. Well, I walked down there the other day, never saw a single frog, not one, right? And it used to be a place that wherever you stepped, the frog would jump, right? And it's, about 10 years ago, 12 years ago, potato farmers bought the property across from me. And if you're familiar with potato farming, I think they put about 800 pounds of fertilizer on per acre, but then it all runs down into the water system. Where all these frogs used to be, where it was deafening behind the house at the bottom of the hill, I have basically the edge of the Carberry Aquifer where the water leaks out. But if all this fertilizer is going down through the sand, it's also coming out the aquifer sooner or later, right? So I don't know if it's the fertilizer, why there's not frogs anymore. I have a place up north where I work, and it's kind of a hole, and I got to pump it out to get at what I'm doing. But the first time I had a hole there, I went there in the spring, and my hole was full of water. So I thought, well, I'll come back later. Well, I went back later, and the hole was full of tadpoles. And I hadn't seen tadpoles for years. And I thought, I started to pump it out, but then I noticed these little guys were getting zipped up into the pump, and I felt really bad. So I packed everything up and went home again. And when I came back a month later, there was new tadpoles there. So I never did anything. I just left my little swampy pond, and every year there's more tadpoles in there. But if I go to the little swamp over by the sloping hill around the corner, there's no tadpoles in there. But where this particular spot was, where I had this hole, there was no runoff from the fields coming into it, right? It was all snow water. And all of a sudden, things started to really thrive, right? So it's really an indication on, what's happening to our planet and what we're doing to it. It takes a whole lifetime, I have found, to see this. You don't see that. You're new. But when you've lived 50 or 60 years and hung out along the rivers and played in the bush and you see this stuff slowly disappearing, right? It's not like it used to be.
I think there is a collapsing of time that happens for somebody who spent a lifetime working in deep time, which is what we call these, like, time that can only be measured in terms of geology, but also working in ceramics, which has a really human history that spans, realistically 500 generations, but according to timeline, a significant time. So I want to talk about how we conflate those two timelines in an ancient art form like ceramics. I'm looking at these vessels in particular that have quite unusual forms, but still are using kind of classical balance, that are lidded, that are symmetrical, even though I think they're cast, right? They're formed, they're not thrown.
No, they're not thrown.
Yeah.
All the pieces that you see in the vessels and everything are molds, but they're forms taken from molds and put back into forms, if that makes sense. So in other words, those two tall ones that you see there, they both come out of the same form, except they were built inside the form with various things, right? And basically what these vessels are, and Lucie, you said classical looking. Yeah, it's part of it. I mean, they're all urns, basically, or storage jars. And basically, they're urns or storage jars for what they represent, right? Thing about clay, out in the field, the raw clay is basically a storage jar or a storage mass that holds previous life, right? So again, it's kind of a salute to the past. Not so much this is our past, or it's going to be our past, but again, and the nice thing about clay, it's one of the few things, fired clay is one of the few things that they find in ancient civilizations that can still tell a story. Because when you fire it, it ends up going back to its original state, or somewhat close to its original state. Does anybody know where clay comes from? Clay comes from feldspatic rock. Okay, it's not mud, it's not black soil, it comes from feldspatic rock. So in other words, when I say that, you have a mountain range, and that mountain range, as it erodes and over millions of years, those clay particles or feldspatic rock will leave and get transported by wind, water, and various other methods and settle out, okay? And what makes clay work the way it does is, we're going back to my intro one, hand building here. Mm-hmm. If you're at the beach and you make a sandcastle, when that sandcastle dries out, it just kind of crumbles. And that's because the particles are all different shapes. They're round, they're square. That sand is probably, a lot of it's probably feldspatic rock, but in bigger chunks. But when you break clay down into the little individual pieces through erosion and wind and all that, clay particles are flat. And they're octagonal, except they're elongated. And that's what makes clay work. It's like washing those two pieces of glass in the sink, and you can't pull them apart, but you can slide them apart. And that's the principle, basic principle on how clay works. So when you form that, or you make something, all those particles are sliding over each other. And then when you quit doing what you're doing and just leave it, it dries that way and won't fall apart. So,
and then when you get it really hot.
And when you get it really hot, you go through quartz conversion, which solidifies it and it won't break down anymore. And depending on what temperature you take it to, it'll even take longer to break down. It'll break down, but it's going to break down over that weathering, wind, water, abrasive sort of thing again, right? The same way it did when it came from feldspatic rock. So,
are there any questions right now? I do want to say that I hope many of you are putting the same things together that I have when I've spoken to Kevin about these things, which is that idea of rockification, that idea that ceramics speeds up this geological process in some way. And I've always kind of left these conversations thinking to myself, why does anybody make ceramics about anything else, really, right? Except for deep time, because the relationship seems so connected.
Yeah.
What you inject into it, more than just reflecting on time according to the scale of rocks, is life, right? Is vitality, is the fact of livingness. You talk about your process and the liddedness of these, your process of finding fossils in a spiritual way, that it is both rock, but also the traces of life that was once here.
Yeah. Yeah. If we want to talk about fired clay and us as a species, when I went to school, the oldest fired clay came out of Japan at 10,000 years of age, and then I was reading the other day they've found pottery shards in northern China that go back 14,000 years, so they've taken it back 4,000 more years. That's the first evidence of clay being used for pots. However, if everybody's familiar with Venus figures, there is some Venus figures that go back 25,000 years that are fired, but I don't think the firing was probably intentional. Because there's such a span between 25,000 and 14,000, you'd think after 10,000 years they would have put two and two together, right? I think probably the Venus figures. Now, and today again, there's different thoughts on Venus figures, but when I went to school, they were referred to as fertility gods, right? So maybe somebody wasn't having a good time, made a little fertility god, still wasn't having a good time, and he got mad and threw it in the fire, right? And possibly either stayed there and was found thousands of years later, or somebody fished it out and realized that if they put the clay in the fire pit, it would get hard. I'm probably too, with your first pot made, it was probably an accident too, because most older pots, you can find a basket weave on them or something like that. So what they used to do is make baskets, weave baskets, and then they'd line them with wet clay to keep the mice and the rodents out and not get into their grains or whatever they've collected. And possibly the first idea of a pot came from maybe that, where they had them sitting by the fire, something caught on fire, the grass caught on fire, the woven basket burnt off, and all of a sudden that clay object was sitting there, right? I don't think somebody just made a pot.
Yeah, you don't get to 13,000 degree fires by accident.
Well, I mean, it's not even that. I mean, as long as you can get to quartz inversion, which is not that.
So how hot does it have to be to just be water resistant, proof, whatever?
Well, it depends on your clay. Your earthenware clays are more absorbent.
Yeah.
Your porcelains are the tightest, but every clay still has.
You could still carry water though.
Has a small absorbency after it's been fired, but earthenware is the orange stuff you usually see where you buy your flower pots and stuff, and you'll water them, and then the outsides will get all wet. That's usually earthenware. In order to solve that problem, you have to get a good glaze to seal it.
600 or so?
Earthenware?
Yeah.
No, it's up to about 1,000 degrees Celsius, right?
It's still hot. Like you have to make a kiln to get that kind of heat.
Well,
or like do something.
Yeah, because if you go back to the original way of firing, pit firing and all that, you're getting it up there, but you're probably only getting it up to about 800 degrees or something like that. That's why a lot of pit-fired stuff breaks very easily, and it doesn't sound like it's very solid after firing, right? But you got to remember, people were doing this back then more for storing and preserving things, right? So, yeah.
Good. questions. Let's look at some fossils and Hesperonychus forms.
Okay. Some of these guys, most of these guys have got a little something in it that some of you might not see.
Yeah.
We talked about frogs. There is a little frog in there, right? Because he needs some water, and he can't find any good water anymore, so yeah. So when you're looking at these things, all the mural pieces have something in them, right? If you haven't noticed.
Right. So Kevin has very generously brought in the fossils that kind of inspired this.
Well, these I brought in 4 fossils here. They go along with these blue birded vases. Okay. These fossils, all 4 of these fossils, are hesperiforms, and what a hesperiform is it's an early Cretaceous bird that lived in the ocean, lived in the sea, probably nested on land, but they didn't have wings. They had little stubby, probably more like little penguin type things, and it's either that because they evolved from theropod dinosaurs. Okay, and when I say they evolved from theropod, the two-legged type of dinosaur. Now, whether they were little guys or big guys that decided that living in the sea was easier to get food, or maybe they found that living along the shoreline and in the water, it was easier to get away from predators. The interesting thing about hesperiforms, I think there's well over 20 different species that have been found now, but they all became extinct at the end of the Cretaceous. They no longer are around.
That was the asteroid in
Yeah,
Guatemala.
Probably
that one?
contributed to the asteroid impact. But hesperiforms, what's really neat about them is they found evidence of one that's probably 7 feet tall. So in other words, if you're out paddling your canoe, this guy could have come up alongside of you. But the worst thing about it is they have teeth. Okay? Even though they're bird related or they come from the ancestors where birds started, they did keep their carnivorous teeth inside their beaks. On that one over there, you can see some of the teeth. But what we have here, this particular one here, if you look closely at it, it's a leg, and it's from the femur all the way down, and then they've got basically a foot bone right on the very end. His toes and everything are missing. That's how he was found in the shale. Okay? And same with the rest of this. This guy here, he's got his hips and part of his neck. There's a piece of rib there, but the rest of the ribs are gone. He was probably consumed or scavenged on the bottom of the ocean after he died, or maybe he was consumed or a carnivore got a hold of him before, and that's what's left of them, right? Some of them you can find, when you're cleaning them, you can find little teeth marks in them where they've been chewed on and everything else. Where I collect these guys all come from the same spot, and it's quite interesting because you find all different sizes of the same species. So possibly it was a rookery or close to a rookery. There is some thoughts on some volcanic islands that used to run down the center of Manitoba when the inland sea was here, and possibly these things nested on these volcanic islands or whatever, and also fed and swam around in the area. But yeah, all the bird stuff comes from 1 square mile area, basically. So. And
I do want to point out when you see, so this is the long process of collecting and cleaning fossils, and nothing's right angles, but they are in layers.
Yeah.
And so the place where you find them, we will never tell, but is a cliff face where you can see like a pencil eraser coming out of the wall, and then you have to come in from the top.
Yeah.
In order to find them.
There's a big idea that when you go looking for a dinosaur, you're going to find it on the ground. And no, you're not. Right? The problem with fossils is that they're so fragile, right? When they hit the elements. And when I say they hit the elements, when the ground around them is eroding and the bone sticks out, especially with these guys can be quite soft. The rain, the freeze-thaw winter, if it's sticking out that fall, it's gone the next spring, right? I've collected fossils. I spend a lot of time on riverbanks looking at sediments or sedimentary rock, and I have found specimens that are quite nice, quite beautiful. I go home, there's a massive rainstorm, I come back, and it's gone, right? So it's really tough until you sort of train your eye to look for them. It can be tough to find them because all you're usually looking for is, yes, a different color change in the bank that you're looking at, right?
And also a spirit.
And a spirit, yeah. I mean, on this leg, you can see the leg itself is broken into 3 sections. Well, what helps contribute to the fossil not showing up on the surface so you can see it, is as that fossil gets closer to the surface where the shale is, the shale rock or bedrock itself, when you dig back in, is one solid mass. It's like a giant rubber super ball. There's no cracks in it or anything like that. But as it gets closer to the surface, the shale starts to dry out and it cracks. So in other words, in order to get that hard rubber ball mass, I usually have to dig back in 3 or 5 feet where there is no cracks. But if you're working on something that's close to the surface, you can see that this leg bone is cracked and there's 3 pieces there. It's because when that shale comes to the surface and starts to dry, it pulls and tugs on the fossil itself and breaks it apart, which makes it so much easier when it does get exposed, just kind of dust itself down the slope and not find it, right? So yeah, you've got to kind of get in there and look for these things, but they're not going to be just lying there for you to see them. And most people think that they're just lying there to be seen, but they're not, right?
So I've kind of teased the spirit and everything, and you were talking about the rookery. So let's go into, there's a lot of play at work where you've hidden things in all of your forms, but the most playful, I think, are these central painted vases where you've actually created almost a
little story?
Comic-like narrative of these creatures. So these, I recommend highly that you guys look up Hesperoniforms, because there is one scientific rendering that I see often, and it's not cute, but you've created these very kind of...
Well, the way I look at it with these guys, and I think about the rookery possible in this area where I'm doing them, you know, they would have lived together in, I don't know what you'd call them, troops or flocks or whatever, and hung out together. But I'm sure they must have been pretty funny looking because their legs were long. They talk about them being very uncoordinated because they went back to the sea to live and all that. There's a lot of writings on them not being able to walk very well, but I'm kind of the opposite. I think they could probably peel along the beach pretty quickly if they had to, right? Where were we going with that?
We talked about the stories.
Oh, the story, yeah. And to be honest with you, I've done birds before, but I started doing them because I was bored and tired of decorating other pots. So I played around with them a little bit, and then for this show I thought, because I had a bunch of vases that weren't glazed yet, we would glaze them up and do some bird stuff on them and tell a little bit of a story about the Hesperoniforms, right?
So, Lynn, also this is where you'll see the prehistoric plant life. You can see they look very much like fluted Egyptian columns almost.
Yeah. And being volcanic islands, there probably wasn't a lot of vegetation on them. Possibly too, if they were nesting on these volcanic islands, possibly the lava rock and everything else was fantastic for putting your eggs on or having your hatchlings in, because the sun would have kept that type of rock really nice and warm. Well, Mom and Dad went and looked for food in the ocean or whatever, right, or in the seaway.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and so if you choose to walk around them, you'll see that there is kind of a narrative that happens, right? This one has a parent pulling out a ammonite.
A parrot?
A parent, right?
Oh, a parent.
Parent.
Yeah.
For their little children here, as a volcano erupts in the background. We have a colony there, the incredibly crowded one that really kicks them into motion. Right? So, I mean, the art historian in me also wants to talk about kind of Mesopotamian, Minoan work because of the way that you've decorated these in a 360.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they're birds. They're not really flyers, so they're not really, I don't know if I'd call them aviators, but they're a group of species that were in a part or in a period of time that lasted and probably enjoyed themselves. Beer and all that kind of stuff, we don't know, but then became extinct. So they had their time here, they did what they did, and then became extinct, not because the genetics or whatever quit, but probably because of the meteor impact, an outside incident that came upon the planet, right? So, but they lived for over 100 million years, basically, and they probably didn't do too much damage on the planet that they lived on, except enjoyed themselves.
Yeah.
Right?
Do you have any questions at this point?
If you look closely at that X-ray up there, that's an X-ray of the one beside it in the case, because things are so fine with a lot of the bones. I'll sometimes take and get them X-rayed to see what else is in the rock before I try to clean them, because things are so delicate. The one on the right, or the one on the left there in the case, that's an X-ray for it. It's reversed, but you can see that it has a tail. There's remnants of a tail on him, and if you look closely, you can see a couple little teeth on the side of his jaw as well. So feel free to go down and have a look.
Yeah, please do.
If you want to.
Reward more.
These birds have personalities, which I like.
Well, yeah.
Clearly a social group, which is
Yeah, and that's good, because they were all supposed to have personalities when we were putting them together, right? It's part of the colony, right?
that's what it looks like. Yes.
Part of the neighborhood.
Did they have webbed feet?
No, evidence shows that they had little pads or discs on their feet. They weren't webbed. So in other words, their toes would have wider pieces of,
Like spoon toes.
yeah. I want to say skin, but it would have probably been more of a cartilage or something like that too. And yeah, they had to be quite fast in the water, because they had all kinds of other material. I mean, mosasaurs, which is a big aquatic lizard that looks a little bit like a crocodile, but they've got flippers on the front and the back. They were quite a dominant predator at that time, and they've found numerous mosasaurs with Hesperonychus in their stomach contents and everything else. But even though they didn't have webbed feet, they with those little padded feet or discs on their feet, they were probably quite fast. They'd have to be able to maneuver quite well to get out of the way of things, right?
I have no idea what time it is. 25 after 2. Great. Okay. Well, we encourage you to look around. Kevin and I will stay here to field questions, right?
Sure.
Yeah. Thanks so much for joining. And again, if you really don't want to be on the edited film, just let us know at the front. We'll make sure that you're not. Okay. Thanks.
Okay. Thanks. Thank you.